to prevent banks from using government-insured deposits to make risky investments. He also wants to keep them from owning hedge funds or private equity funds. Banks took big losses as they traded mortgage-backed securities that went bad. That helped create the financial crisis. Bank shares fell after the president's announcement in January. His earlier efforts at financial reform have faced strong opposition from financial companies and some members of Congress. In the Senate, 60 votes are needed to prevent unlimited debate on a bill. But the Democrats lost their 60th vote. In January, voters in Massachusetts elected a Republican to finish the term of Ted Kennedy, who died in August. Scott Brown opposes the health care legislation in Congress. His election could also affect other areas, like climate change legislation and reforms in the financial system. A separate development in January could affect future elections. The United States Supreme Court cleared the way for unlimited spending by businesses and labor unions in political campaigns. The court voted 5-4 to end a ban on the use of corporate money to pay for independent campaign ads for or against candidates. The court said the restriction on political speech violated the free speech rights guaranteed by the Constitution. But President Obama said the decision will reduce the influence of average Americans. He called it a major victory for powerful interests like big oil companies, Wall Street banks, and health insurance companies. He directed his administration to talk with congressional leaders from both parties to develop a forceful response. Elections for Congress are this November. The next presidential election is in 2012. January 20th marked Barack Obama's first anniversary in office, but the Republican victory in liberal Massachusetts was seen in large part as a sign of voter anger across the country about the economy. Unemployment has doubled in 2 years to 10%. Many people are angry that they struggle while the government rescued big banks. Some banks took losses last year, but others earned record profits. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. In September, President Obama proposed new measures to lift the economy. The central bank, in its latest report, said there was continued growth in the past several weeks, but with widespread signs of slowing. Congressional elections are November 2nd. One new survey showed that 49% of likely voters think Republicans should control Congress. Other polls find that about 60% of Americans think the country is going in the wrong direction. President Obama gave a speech near Cleveland, Ohio. He proposed a tax plan for businesses that make capital improvements, like buying new equipment. The president said, "And I'm proposing that all American businesses should be allowed to write off all the investment they do in 2011. He said this will help small businesses upgrade their plants and equipment and will encourage large corporations to start putting their profits to work. Mr. Obama also proposed to permanently extend a tax credit for research and development. And he offered a plan for rebuilding and modernizing America's roads, rails, and runways. He said it would create jobs and improve transportation. The plan would cost $50 billion, but he promised it would not add to the budget deficit over time. The president spoke in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Both speeches were in the Midwest, an area hit hard by the recession. He said almost every Republican in Congress is saying no to his ideas. But retiring Senator George Voinovich of Ohio told the Washington Post that he planned to help push a bill through the Senate. That bill, supported by the president, contains measures to help small businesses. Still, there is disagreement over the future of the tax cuts approved under President George W. Bush. These are set to end this December. President Obama wants to extend the tax cuts only for families that earn less than $250,000 a year. Republicans oppose ending the tax cuts for higher earners. They say it would hurt small businesses. Democrats argue that few small businesses earn enough for their taxes to go up. Congress passed a big stimulus bill shortly after the president took office last year. But there is little that his newest proposals could do to help the economy before November. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and iTunes at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In early July, an oil pipeline broke under the Yellowstone River in the western state of Montana. The Yellowstone is America's longest undammed river. The spill happened downstream from Yellowstone National Park. The burst pipe spilled as much as 1,000 barrels of crude oil, more than 160,000 liters, into the river. Workers shut off the ExxonMobil pipeline, and the company continued to clean up the spill. But the river was at flood levels and flowing quickly, carrying oil downstream into wetlands, fields, and yards. ExxonMobil spokeswoman Claire Hassett said local officials had ordered a temporary shutdown of the pipeline in May to check on its condition. They were concerned with heavy rains and rising waters. But she said, "We determined that it was safe to operate, and we don't know what has caused this leak." Susan Casey Lefkowitz is with the Natural Resources Defense Council, an environmental group. She says the spill shows the dangers of mixing pipelines and waterways, especially when they are running under some of the most precious river systems that are important not just for wildlife, but also for our communities. The Yellowstone River is critical for irrigation, for example, and so it serves the needs of a lot of farmers and communities along its path. Andy Black heads the Association of Oil Pipelines, an industry group whose members include pipeline owners and operators. He says, "We have processes both within companies and at the associations to share learning and best practices and pursue the goal, which is zero accidents." Mr. Black says the industry does not need more federal and state rules. The regulations cover the major causes of pipeline failures, and we do not see any gaps. Susan Casey Lefkowitz disagrees. One concern, she says, is the future of the Ogallala Aquifer, a major source of water for America's Central Plains. A proposed pipeline called Keystone XL would cross the Ogallala to carry oil produced from tar sands in Canada for processing in Texas. Ms. Casey Lefkowitz says, ironically, it would actually cross the Yellowstone River, where the spill just happened. For VOA Special English, I'm Mario Ritter. For more programs and activities for learning English, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. BP is one of the world's largest energy companies. It reported a profit of about $6 billion in the first 3 months of this year. That was more than double compared to a year ago. Now, BP faces growing political pressure over the worst oil spill in American history. Oil has been flowing from its damaged well in the Gulf of Mexico since April. But the company, formerly called British Petroleum, also faces growing financial pressure. Investors fear the long-term costs for cleanup, recovery, and fines. BP's market value fell more than $60 billion as its share price fell by as much as a third. On June 3rd, BP was finally able to cut a damaged pipe at the well using robotic vehicles. The cut was not exactly as hoped, but it was progress. Crews then turned to placing a cap over the pipe, not to stop it, but to direct at least some of the oil to ships on the surface. The leak is about 1,500 meters under the sea. Yet it may not be fully controlled before August. Workers are drilling 2 relief wells in an effort to ease pressure on the damaged well. President Obama returned to the Gulf for his 3rd visit since the disaster began. The Deepwater Horizon, an oil and gas drilling rig, exploded on April 20th. In June, Attorney General Eric Holder announced criminal as well as civil investigations. He said, "The Department of Justice will ensure the American people do not foot the bill for this disaster and that our laws will be enforced as much as possible." By some estimates, the cost of the cleanup could reach $37 billion. The owner of the rig, the Swiss company Transocean, has asked to have its responsibility limited to $27 million. The request is based on a law from 1851, but the Justice Department says that is not enough. The government could also use violations of other federal laws, such as the Clean Water Act, to collect money for the spill. Oil has already reached more than 100 kilometers of coastline in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. And it threatens the west coast of Florida. Areas of the Gulf have been closed to fishing. But job losses in the fishing industry are not the only worry. The Atlantic hurricane season officially began June 1st. Some people worry that officials could take their land if it becomes polluted by oil in a storm. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In December, the Japanese electronics company Olympus made a public apology. It said company officials hid over $1 billion in losses going back to the 1990s. Olympus said it was investigating and considering legal action against some of its current and former officials. The company's stock lost half of its value between October and December. The problems at Olympus seem to come from thinking more about declaring profits in the short term instead of building real value. This was one of the issues considered by management expert Peter Drucker over his long career. Peter Drucker died in 2005, but many of his ideas remain very meaningful today. Drucker liked to share his knowledge not by answering questions, but by asking them. He once said, business people must not ask, what do we want to sell, but what do people want to buy? He taught at the Claremont Graduate School of Management in California for over 30 years. He advised companies on business methods, and he wrote 39 books on business and economic ideas. Peter Drucker was born in Austria in 1909. In the late 1920s, he worked as a reporter in Frankfurt, Germany. He also studied international law. He fled Germany as Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933. Drucker spent 4 years in Britain as an advisor to investment banks. He then came to the United States. In the 1940s, Drucker argued that the desire for profit was central to business efforts. He also warned that rising wages were harming American business. He was later invited to study General Motors. He wrote about his experiences in the book, The Concept of the Corporation. In it, he said that workers at all levels should take part in decision-making, not just top managers. Later in his career, he warned that businesses that seek only profit growth help their competitors. Peter Drucker received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President George W. Bush in 2002. He lived a long life. He died at the age of 95. Drucker was a voice for change and new ways of thinking about social and business relations. He used terms like knowledge workers and management goals. Many of his ideas have become highly valued in business training and politics. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. A major reform of the American system of health care and insurance has moved farther in Congress than ever before. President Obama wants a final bill passed by the end of the year, but a difficult road still lies ahead. On November 7th, the House of Representatives passed a bill with an estimated $1 trillion price over 10 years. The President called the vote historic. President Obama said, "The Affordable Health Care for America Act will provide stability and security for Americans who have insurance. It will provide quality, affordable options for those who don't. And it will bring down the cost of health care for families, business, and the government while strengthening the financial health of Medicare." But 39 Democrats voted no, and only one Republican, Joseph Cao of Louisiana, voted yes. The bill passed with just 2 more votes than required. Republicans say the plan would add to the nation's debt, raise insurance costs, and expand government involvement in health care. Republican Representative Joe Barton from Texas said, "So there is a choice: bigger government, more mandates, more control, less freedom, or lower costs, more opportunity, more freedom, or more choice. I vote for more freedom." The bill aims to provide health coverage to 36 million Americans. That would raise the nation's coverage rate to about 96%. The most disputed part of the bill is a public option for individuals and small businesses. The government would compete with private plans by offering its own insurance, based on payment rates negotiated with providers. The House bill would raise taxes on high earners to help pay for the plan. It would also cut $400 billion from health programs for the retired and poor, money that supporters of the bill say is now being wasted. Most Americans would have to buy insurance or pay a fine. The government would help the needy. All but the smallest businesses would have to offer insurance for their workers or pay a tax. Some small businesses could receive tax credits to help with their costs. Insurance companies could not deny or cancel coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. And the industry would lose its protection from anti-competitive laws. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. You can read more about the health care debate at voaspecialenglish.com. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Sometimes financial news can be hard to understand. A former official at Goldman Sachs Investment Bank explained what his group did before the financial crisis this way. He said, "Our desk began to accumulate short positions, purchasing protection on individual securities through credit default swaps, largely from external CDO managers who asked us to bid for these positions." Josh Birnbaum was involved in synthetic CDOs. These are really financial bets on whether some asset will gain or lose value. They are at the heart of the government's case against Goldman Sachs for misleading investors. Senator Claire McCaskill described synthetic CDOs during a Senate subcommittee hearing. She said, "Let me just explain in very simple terms what synthetic CDOs are. They are instruments that are created so that people can bet on them. The purpose of language is to communicate information, but it can often hide meaning. Have you ever agreed to the terms of use for a service without reading it all? Annetta Cheek heads the Center for Plain Language in Silver Spring, Maryland. Her nonprofit group has been working for more understandable language in government and business since 2004. She offers one piece of advice for people who receive long, unclear documents. If you don't understand something, don't sign it. This year, the Center for Plain Language held its first contest for Best and Worst Language Use. The best entry receives a Clearmark Award. Confusing language gets a Wondermark Award. One of the Wondermark entries was from the communications company BlackBerry. Annetta Cheek says the terms of use for a BlackBerry are impossible to understand. Ms. Cheek says the healthcare and finance industries are known for using language that is hard to understand. Healthcare has made progress. Several industries competed for this year's Clearmark Award. But the financial industry remains a problem. Ms. Cheek says since the 1990s, the Securities and Exchange Commission has tried to get financial companies to give clearer product descriptions. This has helped sales. She says government has to be involved in requiring clear language because the marketplace has not dealt with the problem. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. Share your thoughts at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Heating and cooling equipment are the biggest users of energy in American homes, and homes are responsible for about 1/4 of the nation's total energy use. But there are surprisingly simple ways to deeply cut energy use, its effect on the environment, and its cost. David Peabody and his team at Peabody Architects design passive homes. He says the design of a passive house aims to reduce energy demand to its lowest possible level. Passive houses use no solar, geothermal, or wind energy equipment, but they are extremely energy efficient. Mr. Peabody says passive houses cut heating and cooling costs by about 90%. But what sets his design apart from other green homes is that it looks like any other home. That is the beauty of the passive house approach, is that you don't have to build in a particular way with any particular materials or to any particular style. That's why, in our case, we decided to try to do something to prove that point, to make something that was very traditionally American. Peabody Architects says it is building the first passive home in the Washington, D.C. area. In Arlington, Virginia, Roger Lynn and his brother Eric are also building one. Roger Lynn of Southern Exposure Homes explains that windows are sealed against leaks and have 3 layers of glass. The windows are airtight. On a cold winter day, the temperature inside the unfinished home is a comfortable 12 degrees Celsius. David Peabody says you can find passive homes all over the world. North Africa, for example, has a passive house community designing for very hot, dry climates, and that's a whole other area of exploration for passive house. The first passive design was an apartment building in Darmstadt, Germany. Two physicists helped develop it about 20 years ago. Passive houses use some specialized materials. These include precast concrete panels and insulation. They also need to have special air treatment systems. Supporters say they cost only about 5 or 8% more than traditional homes, but they use 10% of the energy for heating and cooling. The designs are passive because they do not use geothermal, sun, or wind energy for power. But Passive House Institute US says even greater savings can be reached with additions